I'm insane. I'm a certified...
Sharon was managing me virtually single-handed when we did the Blizzard of Oz tour. This was my chance, and I knew I was only going to get one. I learned that when Sharon's on a mission, she'll fucking throw herself at it lock, stock and barrel. I trusted Sharon like I'd never trusted anyone before on the business side of things. But Sharon wasn't only good with money, she knew how to manage my image too. She had me out of my grubby old Black Sabbath get-up in a second. I'd wear spandex trousers and these long coats studded with rhinestones. Looking back now, I'm not embarrassed by those clothes, but I am embarrassed by how bloated I was. I was a fat, boozy, pizza-eating fuck. Another person I learned to trust on that tour was Tony Dennis. He was this little Geordie bloke who kept turning up to the gigs every night without fail. He came to so many shows I ended up letting him in for free, even though I couldn't understand a fucking word he said. And he's been with me ever since as Tony. Some nights, Sharon would go out of one door and Thelma would come in the other. I was knackered all the time having two women on the go. Looking back now, of course, I should have just left Thelma. But the thought of losing my family was unbearable to me. On the other hand, I'd never known what it was like to fall in love before I met Sharon. Even though we didn't exactly have a normal romance. When we weren't shagging, we were fighting, and when we weren't fighting, we were drinking. But we were inseparable, couldn't stay away from each other. So that Christmas, with the British leg of the tour over, I told Thelma everything. Thelma went up like a bottle of pop, kicked me out and told me she needed time to think. Then Don Arden called Thelma to a meeting in London and told her he was putting his son David in charge of me to get me away from Sharon. But the truth was, he was also shitting himself that Sharon was going to leave Jet Records and go it alone, which could end up costing him a fortune, especially if she took me with her, which is exactly what she did in the end. Before we took the Blizzard of Oz tour to America in April 1981, we went back to Ridge Farm and recorded Diary of a Madman. It took us just under 3 weeks, I think. We were all living in this crappy little flat while we were doing the sessions, and I'll always remember the morning when I woke up and heard this amazing acoustic riff coming out of Randy's room. I burst through his door, still in my underpants, and he was sitting there with a very uptight-looking classical instructor having a lesson. "What was that you just played?" I said, while the instructor stared at me like I was the Loch Ness Monster. "Ozzy, I'm busy." "I know, but what was that you just played?" "Mozart." "Right, we're nicking it." "We can't nick Mozart." "I'm sure he won't mind." It ended up being the intro to Diary of a Madman, although by the time Randy had finished messing around with it, there was hardly any Mozart left. The rest of the album was a blur. We were so rushed for time that we ended up mixing it on the road. It was around then that Bob and Lee started to bitch and moan about everything, which drove me fucking nuts. Anyway, at some point I remember Sharon coming up to us very excited and saying, "Great news, guys. The Palladium in New York want us to do 2 shows in one night." I couldn't believe it. Everything was really taking off. But Bob and Lee said, "Well, if we're doing 2 shows, we want double our travel expenses and double our pay." I wanted them gone after that. Luckily, Sharon managed to sign up Tommy Aldridge, the drummer I'd wanted from the start, and a bass player called Rudy Sarzo, who'd worked with Randy in Quiet Riot. When the second album was finally done, we packed up our stuff, got on a plane and went to LA for a week of rehearsals and record company meetings before the tour began in Maryland.